the historic Liberation Day announcement last week by President Trump made it very clear that the era of American economic surrender is over. President Trump is no longer going to allow American workers and companies to be ripped off at the hands of foolish trade practices that shipped away millions of high-paying jobs and hollowed out communities across the country. It's America first, all the way. And despite fear-mongering by the media, the world is clearly responding to President Trump's approach. Just yesterday, President Trump held a bilateral meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here at the White House. The Prime Minister pledged to immediately eliminate America's trade deficit with Israel and remove their trade barriers. Israel's proactive approach should serve as a model for the rest of the world. Also yesterday, the President spoke with Japan's Prime Minister, who wants to negotiate as well. The President also spoke to the acting President of South Korea this morning. He has tasked Secretary Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer to lead these talks. In total, since the Liberation Day announcement, nearly 70 countries have already reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country. The president is already delivering on his promise to usher in an economic golden age for our country.
The president's threat yesterday on social media to increase tariffs against China by an additional 50% in response to their retaliation. Has he signed anything in terms of an executive order, any documentation around that? Will that additional 50% go into effect tomorrow?
They will be going into effect at 12:01 a.m. tonight, so effectively tomorrow, yes.
Work on that today?
Of course, as always.
I'm curious, though, under what conditions at this point would President Trump talk to President Xi about tariffs?
Look, I just spoke to the president about this, and he believes that China wants to make a deal with the United States. He believes China has to make a deal with the United States. It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. But the president believes that Xi and China want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get that started. And the president also wanted me to tell all of you that if China reaches out to make a deal, he'll be incredibly gracious, but he's going to do what's best for the American people.
So China has to call first?
The Chinese want to make a deal. They just don't know how to do it. But the president will be implementing these 104% tariffs on China tonight.
And under what conditions might he consider lowering tariffs on China at this point?
It would be imprudent of me to tell you those conditions here from the podium.
So was the evolution not factored in or determined by kind of the tumult in the stock market? Was that not a part of the consideration to start making these negotiations and deals?
Again, I would reject that there was an evolution. On day one, we had said that the president will always pick up the phone for other nations and other companies that call this administration. The president always has a listening ear, and it's a non-negotiable fact that America has faced a national security and economic crisis for many decades, and President Trump is just the first to address this.
And then yesterday, Goldman Sachs put out a research note. It put the odds of a recession at 45% within the next 12 months, up from 35%. But Peter Navarro guaranteed last night no recession. Does the president agree with him on that? I know that the president in the past has been leery of making definitive statements on that.
I can speak for the president, and I can speak for the optimism that he sees in our economy every day. Again, when you talk about the massive deregulatory efforts that are happening across the board, when you talk about how oil prices are down, gas prices are down, egg prices are down, we're cutting costs for the American worker, for the American consumer. We also see trillions of dollars of investments pouring into this country every day, and we're working hard now on the tariff side of the president's economic agenda. But don't forget, the next side of this is tax cuts, and we're counting on Capitol Hill to get those done, the largest tax cuts in history.
Does that mean that without those tax cuts coming through, that the likelihood of a recession is greater?
No, that's not what I said. I'm just saying be mindful of the whole of government economic approach that this administration is taking every day.
You just said that one of the reasons these tariffs are going into effect is that some countries have been ripping off the United States, but some of the tariffs target countries like Madagascar, Bangladesh, with very high levels of poverty. So can you explain how the president wants to correct the deficit with those countries? Is there a plan, for example, to onshore the textile industry that these countries are known because, and, you know, just like, can you be specific about those like low-income
Sure.
countries?
Well, first of all, the reciprocal tariff rates that were implemented by country were focused on the monetary tariff that those countries have imposed on the United States, but also the non-monetary tariff barriers and the regulations, if you will, that have been put into effect over the years, making it harder for America to export to these countries. These were very carefully crafted numbers. There was also a 10% baseline tariff across the board, as well, as you know. Moving forward, the president will talk to any country that picks up the phone to call.
Does the president endorse something that Howard Lutnick said on television this weekend, which was that the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones, that kind of thing is going to be moving to the U.S.? Is that how the president envisions manufacturing shifting? And if so, how long would that take, roughly?
The president wants to increase manufacturing jobs here in the United States of America, but he's also looking at advanced technologies. He's also looking at AI and emerging fields that are growing around the world that the United States needs to be a leader in as well. So there's an array of diverse jobs, more traditional manufacturing jobs, as you discussed, but also jobs in advanced technologies. The president is looking at all of those. He wants them to come back home.
But iPhones specifically, is that something that he thinks is the kind of technology that can move to the U.S.?
Absolutely. He believes we have the labor, we have the workforce, we have the resources to do it. And as you know, Apple has invested $500 billion here in the United States. So if Apple didn't think the United States could do it, they probably wouldn't have put up that big chunk of change.
Kevin Hassett said today that the administration is prioritizing talks with Japan and South Korea, other trading partners. Are there other countries on that list that you guys can name publicly that you're having serious discussions with?
Sure. As you have heard from various administration officials, myself included, there have been nearly 70 countries that have reached out to the administration last time I checked, but again, I hear the phones are ringing off the hook. There are foreign leaders who want to fly to Washington tonight and get on a plane to negotiate with this country, which shows you the leverage that the president is using. It shows you the rest of the world needs the United States of America to do business with. Israel, obviously, yesterday you heard a public statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president has detailed his calls with the leaders of Japan, in South Korea. We are going to prioritize our allies and our partners around the world first when it comes to these negotiations, and the trade team will be divvying them up again to make tailor-made trade deals around the world.
First, as a part of these negotiations, is it possible for countries to lower their tariffs below that 10% a bare minimum that's been set?
Again, I'll leave that to the president to make those determinations, but I can tell you that 10% universal baseline will go into effect as these negotiations are ongoing.
Got it. And then what is your thinking just as far as low labor cost countries? Like if you've got a country like Vietnam that wants to negotiate, but obviously they have some advantages in terms of trade, in terms of the people there are not paid as much as American citizens. What is kind of the thinking? Can they still achieve a good kind of trade outcome with the United States?
Well, again, you're right to point out that different countries have different labor markets. They have different skills, if you will, different resources, and the president is going to take all of that into account. His team will take all of that into account when they're negotiating these deals. I do just want to point out one thing, that the president, everybody in Washington, whether they want to admit it or not, knows that this president is right when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to trade. In